Welcome back to Bore Me to Bed, the channel designed to help your mind gently drift away, guided by the soothing rhythm of life's most wonderfully dull topics. Tonight, we're exploring something slow, silent, and effortlessly calming: the gentle formation of rust. Picture that quiet reddish-brown coating softly spreading over forgotten bicycles, old garden gates, and tools patiently resting in sheds. It's nature's sleepy reminder of the slow passage of time. Together, we'll slowly uncover how moisture meets metal, creating rust through a calming, predictable process of oxidation. It's a journey so peaceful, so soothing, your eyelids will gently grow heavy, and your mind will softly drift into dreams. So settle into your blankets, find your perfect cozy spot, and allow the quiet, comforting whisper of rust formation to gently bore you to bed. It is a quiet evening, and the air is still and gentle. Under a dim golden sky, you find yourself in front of an old iron gate at the edge of a forgotten garden. The metal bars of the gate, once painted a vivid blue, are now mostly bare. Their surface is covered in a rough, reddish-brown coat. Flecks of orange and brown cling to the iron like dried leaves on an autumn path. This is rust, a transformation slowly unfolding before your eyes, a story written in the language of time and chemistry. Beyond the gate, the garden it guards has grown wild and quiet. Vines curl around the iron bars and a soft moss touches the metal at the base, as if nature is slowly embracing this man-made object. The once trim pathway is now blanketed with grass, and nearby a tree leans over, its branches offering leaves that fall and gather in the corners of the gate. It's as if the garden and the gate are becoming one, unified by the passage of seasons. In this serene moment, the rusted gate doesn't feel like a ruin. Instead, it seems a natural part of the landscape, quietly aging alongside the trees and stones around it. As you run your fingers softly over the surface, the rust feels brittle and powdery. Tiny flakes break free, staining your fingertips with a fine orange dust. The gate hasn't swung open in many years. The hinges are frozen with corrosion, bonding metal to metal in a stubborn grip. Yet there is something strangely peaceful about this scene. In the fading light of dusk, the rust on the gate glows softly, as if illuminated from within by the memory of sunlight it absorbed during the day. It stands as a quiet testament to the passage of time, a sign that even solid iron can yield to nature's gentle persistence. Rust forms so slowly and silently that we rarely notice its progress. Day by day, year by year, it creeps forward, flake by flake. In this calm moment, you begin to wonder, how does this happen? What secret dance of nature turns a strong grey metal into fragile red dust? To find the answers, we must look closer, beyond the surface, to the tiny world of atoms and molecules where rust's story truly begins. Imagine zooming in to the surface of one of the iron bars, so close that each bump and pit of corrosion becomes a vast landscape. In this miniature world, a thin film of moisture clings to the metal, perhaps left by the morning dew or a recent rain. Within that invisible film of water, the stage is set for a quiet chemical drama. The players are simple and familiar: iron from the metal, oxygen from the air, and water itself. Though common, together they engage in a subtle interaction that gradually changes the very nature of the metal. Iron is a sturdy element, one that humans have relied on for millennia. In its pure metallic form, it is lustrous and silvery grey, brimming with strength. But iron has a hidden longing. It naturally prefers to be combined with oxygen, as it was when it was locked in the Earth's minerals before we freed it with fire. When iron meets oxygen in the presence of water, a transformation begins. This process is known as oxidation, and rust is its result. In a way, when iron rusts, it is as if the metal is returning to its original form, the form it held in ancient rocks and soil before humans extracted it and made it into tools and structures. On the surface of the iron gate, the moisture from the air dissolves some of the oxygen from the atmosphere, and the water becomes slightly like a thin electrolyte solution, a conduit for tiny charged particles. The iron atoms at the metal's surface now find themselves in contact with this oxygen-rich film. Some of these iron atoms begin to lose their grip on the solid metal and slip out into the water as positively charged particles called iron ions. When an iron atom gives up electrons and becomes an ion, it leaves those free electrons behind in the metal. Iron, being a conductive metal, allows those electrons to wander through it, like restless spirits seeking a partner to react with. Nearby, dissolved in the thin water layer, molecules of oxygen find those free electrons very attractive. Oxygen gas, which makes up about 1/5 of our air, has a great hunger for electrons. As the iron atoms release electrons into the metal, the oxygen at the water's edge eagerly accepts them, each oxygen molecule taking on electrons and reacting with water to form negatively charged hydroxide ions. This quiet exchange, iron surrendering electrons, oxygen receiving them, is the heart of the electrochemical reaction that creates rust. It is like a slow dance of give and take. The iron gives up parts of itself, in the form of ions and electrons, and oxygen gracefully accepts those electrons to form new compounds. The newly formed iron ions drift away from the metal surface into the water film, but they do not remain alone for long. They encounter the hydroxide ions formed by oxygen's embrace of the electrons. When iron ions and hydroxide ions meet, they bond into compounds known as iron hydroxides. Initially, this might appear as a greenish or bluish-grey gelatinous substance. You might have seen something like it as a spot of fresh corrosion on a piece of steel or a nail. But these hydroxides are not stable. They soon undergo further changes. The iron in them further combines with oxygen, and loses some water content, to form a more familiar reddish-brown compound, iron 3 oxide, often with water bound into its structure. This is rust, the final offspring of iron, water, and air. Rust is not a single substance, but a family of compounds, all cousins in the chemical world. The most common form, the one that colours the gate a ruddy brown, is a hydrated iron oxide, often written as Fe2O3.NH2O, iron oxide with water molecules attached. If you could look at rust under a microscope, you would see it is made of tiny irregular crystals forming a flaky porous layer on the metal's surface. Unlike some other metals which form a tight protective oxide coating, for example, aluminum quickly forms a thin skin of aluminum oxide that seals the metal beneath. The rust on iron is fragile and permeable. It doesn't stick strongly to the iron, it tends to crack and crumble, exposing fresh metal underneath. This is why once rusting begins, it can continue until the iron is completely consumed, unless something intervenes to stop it. The protective patina that forms on copper or aluminum does not form on plain iron. But rust can appear in different colours and forms depending on the conditions. You might see rust that is bright orange, or darker brown, even yellowish or nearly black in some cases. Often a new rust spot will start as a light orange or yellow-brown fluff when it's full of water, and then turn a deeper red-brown as it dries and crystallises. In low oxygen conditions, iron might form a black oxide called magnetite, while in very moist conditions you might notice patches of yellow-brown limonite, a softer hydrated oxide. All of these are variations on the same theme, iron combining with oxygen and sometimes water, painting the metal in a palette of autumnal hues. Each shade whispers a slightly different tale of how the rust formed, quickly or slowly, with much or little moisture, in the open air or underwater, over days or over decades. All of this happens silently at the interface between metal, water, and air. It produces no flame or obvious heat, yet it is akin to a slow burning. In fact, rusting is often described as the slow combustion of metal. Combustion, or burning, is rapid oxidation that releases heat and light. Think of how a piece of steel wool ignites in a flame and burns with bright sparks. Rusting is the same fundamental process, but stretched out over months or years instead of seconds. The iron combines with oxygen, releasing a tiny bit of energy with each atom's transformation, but so slowly and spread out that we feel no warmth and see no glow. Instead of a bright fire, the result is a gentle bloom of orange and brown crust on the iron. Water is a crucial partner in this transformation. Without water, iron would oxidize far, far more slowly. Dry oxygen alone can make iron develop a thin film of oxide. For example, an iron object kept in very dry air might gain a faint dull grey coating over a great many years, but that process often stops at a microscopic layer, because in dry conditions the oxide can form a tighter barrier. However, in the presence of water, everything changes. Water molecules permeate the tiny gaps and carry dissolved oxygen to the iron's surface, and they also help break apart the oxygen molecules into more reactive atoms. Water provides the medium in which ions can move freely. Essentially, water is the facilitator, the matchmaker, bringing iron and oxygen together in a reaction neither could easily accomplish alone at normal temperatures. Think of a droplet of water resting on the iron gate after a light rain. At the very edges of the droplet, where the water film is thinnest, oxygen from the air readily diffuses into the moisture and reaches the metal. Under the centre of that droplet, the situation is a bit different. Oxygen might become scarcer there as it gets used up. These minute differences in oxygen within the droplet set up tiny electrochemical cells. One part of the iron under the drop becomes an anode, where iron atoms lose electrons and go into solution as ions, and another part, perhaps nearer the edges, becomes a cathode, where oxygen gains those electrons. Through the water connecting them, an invisible circuit is completed. Electrons flow within the metal from the anode region to the cathode region, and ions drift through the water. Even a tiny droplet can host countless such microcells, pitting the iron in one spot and depositing rust in another. Often this results in a telltale pattern, a more pronounced rust ring around the edges of where the droplet sat, like a delicate outline drawn on the metal. The centre of the drop, having less access to oxygen, might leave less rust, while the edges, rich in air, form a darker circle. When the water eventually evaporates, that thin orange ring is the memory of the raindrop's visit, a subtle signature of where it once lay. As the rainwater evaporates, it might leave behind a faint mark, perhaps a small patch or ring of brown, showing where the droplet had been. These are often the first visible signs of rust, little spots or speckles on an otherwise smooth metal surface. Over time, if moisture returns again and again, those spots expand. They may grow and merge like spreading blooms. What begins as a constellation of tiny rust freckles can slowly become larger patches, which then join to form broad swaths of roughness. The metal gradually loses its silvery sheen and takes on a reddish-brown, earthy appearance. Its surface, once smooth, becomes coarse to the touch. What was once solid iron transforms into a flaky crust that can be brushed away with a finger. Environmental factors can hasten or hinder this gentle decay. Consider the role of salt, for instance. If our iron gate stood near the ocean, the spray of salt water and salt-laden air would accelerate the corrosion significantly. Salt dissolved in water creates an electrolyte solution that is much more conductive than pure water, allowing electrons and ions to move more easily. This means the electrochemical cells that form during rusting can operate more efficiently, speeding up the reaction. A gate by the seaside might develop a rough, orange coat of rust in a matter of months, whereas the same gate in a dry inland climate could take many years to reach a similar state. Salt can also draw moisture out of the air. Even on days that seem dry, a thin, invisible layer of salt on the metal can absorb water from humidity, keeping the metal damp and the rusting process alive. That's why things rust so readily near the sea or in winter climates where roads are salted. The metal is almost never truly dry. On the other hand, imagine the gate standing in a desert. In the arid air with scarcely any moisture, the iron might remain largely unchanged for a very long time. Deserts can preserve metal relics astonishingly well. An old car body abandoned under the desert sun might stay mostly unrusted for decades, the only oxidation being a faint dulling of the surface, because there is simply not enough water for rust to thrive. In those conditions, the lack of moisture is the limiting factor. Oxygen may surround the metal abundantly, but without water to bridge the reaction, rust struggles to gain a foothold. And if any rust does begin on a rare damp morning, the dryness soon halts its spread. Temperature too plays a role. A cold winter day slows the reaction, while the warmth of summer speeds it up slightly. As a rule, chemical reactions proceed faster at higher temperatures. Still, rust never completely stops as long as even a tiny bit of moisture and oxygen are present. On what seems like a perfectly dry day, iron might still hold a molecular film of water on its surface. Too thin to see or feel, but enough to allow some microscopic corrosion to proceed. In a sense, rust is patient and persistent, able to work under the faintest of conditions, a few molecules at a time, always inching forward. It's no wonder people often say, "Rust never sleeps," a little phrase acknowledging that corrosion is always quietly at work whenever it can be, never truly resting. The world is full of examples of this slow inevitability. Picture for a moment a mighty ship at sea. Its hull is made of thick steel plates, painted and cared for, cutting through the waves beneath a broad sky. The ocean spray constantly bathes it in salt water, while the sun beats down and the wind whips foam against its sides. The crew knows well the battle against rust. It is a daily duty aboard any metal ship. You can almost see them in your mind's eye. Sailors with scraping tools and brushes, chipping away a patch of blistered paint where an orange-brown bloom of rust has started to swell underneath. They then coat it with fresh paint, restoring the vivid protective layer. Yet despite their diligence, any lapse in vigilance allows rust to take hold. In corners unseen, in the deep belly of the ship where water condenses, or along joints and rivets, the steel quietly reddens. Over years, even a well-kept vessel must periodically visit dry dock for an overhaul. Sections of steel are replaced, new coats of primer and paint are applied, and sacrificial blocks of zinc, called anodes, are bolted to the hull, all in an effort to keep the relentless red at bay. Far below the waves on the ocean floor lie the wrecks of ships from ages past. Some wooden, many made of iron and steel. Think of a sunken steamship from the 19th century, resting in the cold darkness. Down there, the process continues in eerie silence. Bacteria join in the feast, some consuming iron and producing acids that chew into the metal, others assisting in the creation of curious rust formations that marine explorers call rusticles, which hang like stalactites from the submerged hull. These rusticles are fragile, disintegrating at a touch, formed by colonies of iron-eating microbes that help sculpt the ship's remains. In the cold and dark, they slowly grow as the metal is consumed, an almost organic-looking extension of the ship, as if it sprouted mineral icicles. Over a century, a proud ship can dissolve into a ghost of its former self, held together by little more than rust and the incrustations of sea life. An explorer's gentle fin kick might break off a piece of a railing, now nothing but a brittle tube of oxide. In a few decades or centuries more, those rusticles and remnants will crumble away as well, leaving only fine particles to settle on the ocean floor, the final chapter of the ship's material journey. The water, far from preserving the ship, works with oxygen, even the small amount dissolved in the deep sea, to reclaim the iron back to nature. Now lift your eyes from the depths to the heights of a great steel bridge spanning a river. If you've ever walked across a large bridge like this, you may have noticed maintenance crews perpetually painting its vast structure. The famous Golden Gate Bridge, for instance, is continually being repainted from end to end. By the time the crew finishes, it's essentially time to start again. This endless painting isn't just for aesthetics, it's a vital armour against rust in the moist, salty air of the bay. In the quiet hours of early morning, as fog drapes the bridge in dew, tiny droplets condense on the cold steel. Those droplets carry out the same mission as the dew on our garden gate, providing a medium for iron and oxygen to meet. Without the protective paint, even that mighty bridge would, over years, succumb to gradual weakening. Each of its countless steel cables, if left bare, could rust and lose strength. But thanks to human care, the bridge remains robust and safe, its famous orange-red coating not just pleasing to the eye but serving as a shield against creeping decay. The paint serves not just as decoration, but as a protective skin. As long as the paint layer is unbroken, the steel beneath remains dry and untouched by air. The iron stays in its metallic form. If you scratch through that paint to the metal below, however, you create a tiny doorway for rust to enter. Moisture will creep under the surrounding paint and begin quietly undermining it. That's why the bridge's caretakers are so vigilant, sealing any little crack or chip with fresh paint. In a sense, their endless painting is like tending to a living thing, ensuring its skin remains intact and healthy, so that the bones of steel inside stay strong. Consider also something as ordinary as a forgotten tool left outside. Perhaps it's a shovel propped against a shed, accidentally left in the yard through the changing seasons. Through spring rains, summer heat, autumn mist and winter snow, it undergoes a quiet metamorphosis through the year. In the springtime, frequent rains soak the metal, and the first bright orange speckles bloom on its surface like tiny flowers. Under the summer sun, the shovel dries out, the initial rust darkens to a deeper brown and forms a crust, and for a while the progress slows as the heat chases away moisture. Come autumn, the air turns cool and damp again, and fallen leaves gather around the shovel's blade. Beneath those decaying leaves, new patches of rust spread more quickly, nourished by constant dampness. By winter, frost and snow often cover the shovel on cold nights. When the sun peeks out and melts the ice, little rivulets of water run along the metal, carrying rust with them and expanding the corroded areas. Each season adds a layer to the story etched in orange and brown. By the time spring returns, a year's worth of corrosion is visible. The shovel is now deeply reddened, its once smooth blade rough and jagged where bits of metal have flaked away. If you try to lift it after that year, you might find the blade stuck in the soil by a clot of rust bonding it to the earth. This everyday scene is rust at work, diligent, unhurried, and relentless, gradually weakening the metal that once served so well. In cities, the signs of rust's slow handiwork are all around us if we look closely. Cars that have braved many winters eventually show brown bubbles of rust under their paint, especially along the edges of doors and fenders, where salty water tends to linger. If left unattended, those bubbles burst through the paint, leaving scabs of rust. Over a few more years, holes may perforate the metal. An old car in a scrapyard might have floors so rusted that your feet could push through. The term rust bucket is affectionately used to describe a vehicle so riddled with rust it has more holes than metal in places. Yet think of how slow this transformation is. The car likely served its owner for a decade or two, the rust spreading almost imperceptibly each season, until one day the damage was too great to ignore. The change from shiny new automobile to rusted relic happened gradually, a testament to time rather than any sudden event. Even the rails that carry our trains are not immune. Picture an old railway spur, seldom used, stretching silently through a field. The long steel rails have taken on a fine coat of reddish-brown, a stark contrast to the vibrant green of summer grass, or the white hush of winter snow around them. Without the daily trains, the rails are left to the caress of dew and rain, and they blush with oxide. On a busy track, by contrast, every passing train polishes the top of the rails to a silvery shine, the wheels scraping away any rust almost as quickly as it can form. But here on the abandoned line, morning sunlight reveals a faint haze of rust on the metal. Should a train ever roll down these tracks again, you would hear the crackle and squeal as the wheels grind off that layer, exposing bare steel beneath. In this way, motion and use can chase rust away for a time, yet once the activity stops, nature quietly resumes its work on the idle iron. Even in our homes, we witness rust's subtle presence, perhaps on a bathroom fixture where the chrome plating has worn off. One day you notice a thin reddish ring at the base of the faucet, where water tends to collect, or a stain on the porcelain where water drips from an iron pipe. Maybe on an old cast iron radiator there's a dusty line of rust along a seam, evidence of a tiny leak long ago. These are minor blemishes and often easily fixed, but they are gentle reminders that iron and steel objects around us are not eternal. They are engaged in a quiet conversation with their environment that will eventually change them entirely if given the chance. Rust, then, is as much a part of the life of an iron object as forging or polishing or shining it. From the moment iron is shaped into a tool, a beam, or a gate, an unwritten pact is made with time and nature. I will serve, the iron says, but eventually I will yield. This yielding is usually not sudden or catastrophic. It is gradual, often graceful. There's a certain beauty in a well-weathered piece of iron. The texture of rust can be surprisingly intricate, with swirls and layers built up over years. In many cases, a rusted object becomes a kind of chronicle of its own existence. A rust stain along the side of an old watering can might tell of water that often dripped there after each use. A patch of deeper brown on a gate's latch might speak of all the hands, damp from rain or dew, that have pulled it open over decades, each leaving behind a touch of moisture. These traces don't destroy the object's story. They enrich it, giving it character. Some people find that a bit of weathering makes an object more charming. It appears well-travelled and full of memories. It's as if the iron carries echoes of every season it has endured. Each patch of rust a memory of a rainy day, a foggy morning, or a salty breeze it has known. Indeed, some artists and architects even embrace rust, allowing steel structures or sculptures to rust intentionally to achieve a desired look. They use weathering steel, an alloy designed to develop a stable, protective rust layer that doesn't flake away, to create living surfaces that change colour with the seasons, but then settle into a long-term coat of earthy brown. In some modern parks or building facades, you may have seen large metal panels with a rich amber-brown finish. At first glance, it might look like old rust, but it's actually a deliberate and controlled patina on weathering steel. Over a few months of exposure, the steel rusts just enough to coat itself, and then the process slows dramatically as that tightly adhering oxide layer shields the metal underneath. The rust itself becomes the protector. Architects choose this material to give their creations a natural aging character that harmonizes with the environment. The steel ages gracefully. Its coloration evolves from a fresh orange to a deep brown over time, and then it remains stable for decades. In this approach, rust is not seen as decay, but as an intentional finish, nature's paint, guided by human design. We have journeyed through the realm of rust, from the tiny realm of atoms to towering bridges and sunken ships. But what of those who walked this path long before us? This phenomenon is not new. It has been the bane and companion of ironworkers since ancient times. Imagine an ancient Roman armourer in a sun-dappled workshop, inspecting a collection of swords and spears after a military campaign. The air in Rome, often humid from the Mediterranean, could corrode weapons if they were neglected. Our armourer sees the telltale signs: a blush of brown on a sword's edge, red speckles where a spearhead meets its wooden shaft. In that era, they knew empirically that iron left damp would decay, even if they didn't know the chemistry. So they took precautions. They might polish the metal to remove any hint of rust, then oil it to repel moisture. In fact, historical writings suggest methods. The Roman author Pliny the Elder recommended giving iron a coating of oil and wax or tar to protect it from rust, an early form of rust proofing. Far to the east, in ancient China and Japan, people discovered that painting or lacquering iron could preserve it. A Japanese swordsmith or samurai warrior, for example, treated a prized steel blade with utmost care. After each use or exposure, it was cleaned and anointed with oil of clove or mineral oil. Even the touch of a finger, which left behind moisture and salts, was enough to start rust on a finely polished sword, so ritualized cleaning was essential. In the Far East, iron tools and weapons were sometimes coated in lacquer, a hard plant-based varnish. Iron helmets, sword sheaths, and decorative ironwork have been found with lacquer coatings that kept them remarkably free of rust over centuries. In medieval Europe, a knight in armour faced the same foe. After a day of travel or battle in the rain, his armour had to be taken apart, wiped dry and rubbed with oil or tallow to ward off rust. A suit of armour left damp could develop enough rust by the next morning to seize up its joints or weaken its links. Blacksmiths of the time also learned that tin plating some items, dipping them in molten tin, would prevent rust. This was done for iron cookingware and even armour pieces to give a silvery rust-resistant finish. So from east to west, different cultures converged on the practice of sealing iron away from air and water, by oils, paints, waxes and other coatings, to preserve its strength. Through the Renaissance and Industrial Revolution, iron and later steel became ever more central to human life, in rails, ships, machines and buildings. The fight against rust took on greater urgency and ingenuity. Painters developed specialized anti-rust paints, often containing lead or zinc, to prime iron structures. Engineers discovered that galvanizing iron, dipping it in molten zinc, would coat it with a layer of zinc that protected the iron underneath. The zinc served as a willing sacrifice, corroding slowly in place of the iron, because zinc reacts with oxygen even more readily than iron, but forms a durable white zinc oxide. Around the turn of the 20th century, a monumental development occurred, the invention of stainless steel. By mixing iron with other metals like chromium and nickel, metallurgists found that the resulting alloy would resist rust almost entirely. Chromium in the steel reacts with oxygen to form a thin, invisible film of chromium oxide that clings to the metal and shields it, essentially allowing the metal to protect itself. A stainless steel knife or railing can sit out in the rain and remain shiny, because any time iron starts to oxidize, the chromium in the immediate area already has formed a protective oxide layer, preventing any rust from spreading. It was as if iron, through alloying, had been taught a trick from aluminum or copper to form a patina that guards rather than destroys. Another method to guard against rust, especially in systems where water is present, is the use of chemical inhibitors. In closed cooling systems or boilers, for example, certain compounds can be dissolved in the water that coat the metal surfaces and slow down corrosion, or that neutralise acids which would accelerate rust. Even in the cooling fluids of car engines, anti-freeze, there are additives to prevent the iron engine block or radiator from corroding internally. These inhibitors are like invisible caretakers, ensuring that the water, which is needed for the system to function, does not bite too hard on the metal that contains it. Another modern strategy is to use electrical currents to defend against rust's electrochemical nature. Large pipelines running underground often have a small DC current applied to them, which supplies electrons to the metal and wards off its tendency to give them up. It's as if engineers gently push back at rust on the atomic level, telling the iron, no, don't let go of your electrons. This technique, known as cathodic protection, keeps the iron continuously reduced, in chemical terms, so it won't oxidize. In a simpler form, many ships and underground structures have blocks of a more reactive metal like zinc or magnesium attached to the iron. These are sacrificial anodes, pieces of metal that corrode in place of the iron. Over time, the anodes slowly dissolve, and periodically they're replaced, much like offering up decoys for rust to consume, so the main structure stays intact. All these methods, whether through oils and coatings, alloying, chemical inhibitors, or electrical currents, are ways we've learned to bargain with nature's process, to delay that final reddish fate of iron for as long as possible. Yet, despite all these advances and protections, the fundamental truth remains: if iron, water and oxygen meet unchecked, rust will form. We can slow it greatly, we can stave it off for years or centuries, but if conditions allow, the reaction resumes. Think of an old iron pipeline buried in the ground that once had a perfect protective coating. Decades pass. The coating develops hairline cracks or desponds in spots. Through a tiny breach, groundwater seeps in and touches bare iron. It might start with a small pit of rust, hidden in the dark beneath the soil. Slowly that pit deepens and spreads under the coating. The pipe, unseen from above, quietly thins as flakes of rust fill the void between metal and coating. Left long enough, the pipe could weaken and leak or fail, all because of nature's persistence finding a way in. It might take 10, 20, 50 years, but that patient process continues as long as iron and water are together. Even the earth itself shows us that rusting is natural and ubiquitous. The reddish hues in certain rocks and soils come from iron oxide minerals similar to rust. In fact, the soil beneath your feet likely contains iron that has already oxidized into tiny coloured particles, painting the ground in reds, yellows, and browns. On a grander scale, the planet Mars gleams red in our night sky because its surface is covered in iron oxide dust, essentially rust on a planetary scale, giving an entire world its colour. Eons ago, Mars likely had liquid water and a thicker atmosphere that allowed iron in its rocks to oxidize extensively. Now, with Mars's water mostly locked away as ice, and only a thin, cold atmosphere remaining, the rust there lies largely inert, a vast, quiet desert of iron oxide. An entire planet wears this dusty red cloak of oxidation, a silent testament to chemical processes playing out on a cosmic canvas. It's awe-inspiring to think that the same process tinting a forgotten garden gate orange has painted the surface of a distant planet. On Earth, iron cycles through forms, from ores in the ground, often iron oxides in the first place, to metal in our hands, and back to oxide in the end. It is a wheel turning slowly through time, and indeed, evidence of this slow wheel is found in the soil and in the relics of the past. Imagine an archaeologist at a quiet excavation site, carefully brushing soil away from what appears to be an ancient tool. She uncovers the outline of an iron blade, perhaps a small knife, buried for centuries. The shape of the blade is there in the earth, still recognizable, but when she tries to lift it, it crumbles into reddish powder and flakes of metal oxide. The iron that once was a solid knife has long since transformed entirely into rust. What remains is a fragile shell of iron oxide and stain in the soil, exactly in the shape of the original object. Sometimes, an object is found so encased in rust that the archaeologist can only guess its form until they X-ray it or stabilize it. The rust has taken on the shape of the item, like a natural casting, but the metal inside is mostly gone. These silent witnesses tell us how thoroughly time and corrosion can erase even the hardest of metals. The sword that once gleamed in a warrior's hand might now exist only as a faint brown outline under the earth, returned almost completely to the minerals from which it was originally extracted. Such findings are humbling, reinforcing that given enough years, nature's patience overcomes human craftsmanship in the end. It is telling that artifacts from the even older Bronze Age often survive in better condition than younger iron artifacts. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, does not rust. Instead, it develops a green patina that can actually protect it from further corrosion. Thus, an ancient bronze sword buried for millennia might be pulled from the earth still largely intact and shining beneath its green surface, whereas an iron sword from centuries later may be found as only a rusted silhouette. Iron's great strength in life comes with this hidden weakness in time. Our ancestors learned through experience that iron tools and weapons needed continual care to endure through the years, even though in their prime they were superior to the bronze tools that came before. Think also of that remarkable iron pillar in India, erected over 1,600 years ago and still standing with only mild rusting. For a long time, people marvelled at it, considering it almost magical that the pillar had not rusted away. Science eventually revealed that its makers, perhaps unknowingly, used iron with a high phosphorus content and low sulfur and manganese. This composition, plus the dry conditions, allowed a thin layer of iron hydrogen phosphate to develop on the surface, which greatly slowed further rust. In essence, the pillar built its own protective skin. It's a reminder that even within rusting, there are nuances and surprises. Not all iron succumbs at the same rate or in the same way. For example, the old-fashioned wrought iron used by blacksmiths in past centuries tends to rust more slowly than modern steel. Wrought iron was not pure. It contained tiny inclusions of slag, a glass-like byproduct of smelting. Those slag fibres within the iron can actually act as barriers to corrosion, helping any rust that does form to adhere tightly and not flake off. As a result, a wrought iron fence from the 1800s might stand for ages with only a skin of stable brown patina, whereas a newer mild steel fence could rust through more quickly if left unpainted. The very impurities and fibrous texture of wrought iron give it an inadvertent resilience. Such subtleties show that the story of rust is complex. Composition, environment, and time weave together the final outcome. The Iron Pillar of Delhi stands as a bridge between human craftsmanship and nature's moderation, a balance where composition and environment slowed rust to a crawl. As you breathe in the cool evening air by the garden gate now, perhaps you catch a faint earthy scent. Some say rust has a smell, a metallic mineral odour that you notice when handling old metal, or when rainwater runs over rusty iron. It's the smell of iron oxide and wet earth, a scent that somehow feels ancient and familiar. In this peaceful moment, that scent mixes with the smell of grass and wood from the garden. It is subtle and not unpleasant, just a gentle reminder of the chemistry quietly occurring on the gate's surface. Reach out and gently tap the iron bar. It gives a soft, dull ring, not the sharp clang of clean metal, but a muted note. The rust on the gate dampens the sound, as if even the metal's voice has grown softer with time. Feel the coolness of the iron under the evening sky. During the day, the metal warmed under the sun, now it cools, and a thin layer of moisture may be forming again as the night air grows humid. The cycle of condensation and evaporation, of wetting and drying, it continues quietly, setting the stage for a little more rust to form while the world sleeps. Now step back and consider the scene as a whole. The old gate, the garden beyond overgrown with vines and weeds, a few crumbling stone statues perhaps, and the twilight sky above. It's a picture of serenity and decay in harmony. The rusting gate is not an object of sadness but of quiet dignity. It has stood here for generations, weathering countless seasons. Each patch of rust is like a memory of a rainy day or foggy morning it has witnessed. In some places the metal may have thinned dangerously. If one tried to force the gate open now, part of it might break. But left undisturbed, it could remain in place for many years yet, gradually continuing its transformation. Our journey through the world of rust has shown us change on many scales, from the microscopic dance of electrons up to the fate of ships and bridges. It reminds us that even the strongest materials are vulnerable to time's patient touch, and that the natural world is always interacting with the things we build. There is a kind of wisdom in rust if we choose to see it. It teaches the inevitability of change and the importance of care and maintenance, and it also teaches us about acceptance. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we must accept that change will happen. Everything man-made that is exposed to the elements will eventually wear down, and that's not a cause for despair, but a recognition of our place in the larger cycle of things. And yet, within this inevitability, there are stories of resilience and adaptation. We've seen how human ingenuity learned to slow rust, and even how rust itself can become a protective coat, with weathering steel, or an artful finish. We've seen that not all rusting is destructive chaos. Sometimes it's controlled, sometimes surprisingly benign, as with that ancient pillar or a well-kept wrought iron heirloom. In a way, the tale of how rust forms is both scientific and quietly poetic. It's a reminder that even in stillness there is change, and in change there can be a strange beauty. Even as we stand here by the old gate, the chemistry of the world carries on its gentle work, and when we step away, that work will continue, whether or not anyone is there to observe. Allow yourself now to let go of any remaining curiosities or concerns about the details. You have walked through the world of rust and learned its secrets, and that knowledge will remain, like the sturdy posts that support this gate. For now, though, there is nothing more you need to do. Just as the gate simply stands and allows nature to take its course, you too can simply be here in this moment. As you listen to this gentle narrative, you might find your thoughts drifting, like those free electrons in the iron, wandering and then settling. There's comfort in knowing that some things happen slowly and predictably. The gate will not crumble in an instant. It will stand through many more nights and days, changing only a little at a time. Likewise, our own lives are full of gradual changes that we need not fear. They happen in their own time. In understanding rust in some small way, we touch on a broader understanding of patience and gradual transformation. The night air is perfectly still. Perhaps in the distance a faint cricket song can be heard, or the gentle sigh of a breeze through leaves, but nothing disturbs the peace of this moment. The garden gate stands quietly under the stars overhead, their ancient light falling softly on the earth. Those stars have seen centuries come and go. Under their patient gaze, the slow rusting of a humble gate is just one small, gentle change among countless others. Knowing this, you might feel that our worries too are small against the vast backdrop of time and nature. The universe carries on, and so do these subtle transformations regardless of our concerns. They are simply a part of the world's rhythm, and as the night deepens, you too can embrace a state of rest. The air has grown cooler, the sounds of day have faded away. Perhaps you can imagine dew beginning to form on the grass, and even on the iron gate once more, the world setting the stage for another cycle of rust while you sleep. Everything is doing what it must. The gate stands, the night falls, and you are here, breathing softly. Your only task now is to rest. Feel the weight of your body being supported by your bed or chair, as securely as the gate is supported by its posts. The world of rust carries on slowly outside, but here you are safe and at ease. Each breath you take is like a soft breeze over the metal, calm and steady. With each exhale, imagine any stress leaving, and with each inhale, invite calm and rest into your body, just as iron releases its old form to become something new. You are part of this peaceful night. You are as safe and grounded as the iron in the earth. Now, as you prepare to drift into sleep, carry with you the calm understanding of rust's gentle lesson, that transformation can be slow and natural, and that in yielding there is no defeat, only the continuation of the cycle. The tale of rust has shown that even what seems solid and permanent changes in time, and that's all right. In that same way, any troubles or thoughts in your mind can slowly dissolve as you relax, given time and a gentle release. In this stillness, imagine the tiniest whisper of rust forming, an almost imperceptible sound of atoms rearranging, a lullaby of chemistry that has been sung since the first dawn of iron and air. It is a sound you cannot hear with your ears, only with your understanding. Let that thought be calming. Even in the quiet and darkness, gentle and inevitable processes continue in the world, and that is as it should be. You feel as peaceful as this silent, overgrown garden now, secure and at ease. There is no need to hold on to any stray thoughts. They can float away like an evening mist. Sleep is coming naturally, softly, like twilight slowly turning into night. Embrace it, and drift wherever your dreams take you, warm and safe. Thanks for joining me on this slow and peaceful exploration into the gentle world of rust. I hope the calm rhythm of oxidation has quietly eased your mind toward restful sleep. Oh, are you still awake? Not to worry, there are plenty more wonderfully dull stories here to help you drift away whenever you're ready. Good night.